What's the down payment for an FHA loan? 3.5%. That doesn't even cover the commission to sell a house. Right? The real estate commission is 5%. So that's the same thing as zero down. Well, didn't we learn a lesson that zero down is not a good idea? If you let somebody gamble for free, they'll do it. You know, and if they have no equity, they mail in the keys instead of their mortgage payment. I mean, that's the big problem, right? People don't want these houses because they have an easy out, because they didn't have anything down. Or if they put it down, they extracted it in a cash out. You know, there was one person I read in the news, and they tried to make a big deal about foreclosure and how much people are losing. There's this woman, her house was being foreclosed on, and she had like a $500,000 mortgage. But she only paid about $100,000 for the house. She had a $500,000 mortgage. Where'd that mortgage come from? She borrowed all, she already spent 400 grand more than she paid for the house. When they foreclosed on her house, she had 2 new cars in the driveway. That's where they came from. I mean, they had a great time on that house. You know, they don't lose anything, it's the lenders. But, shit, I just lost my train of thought. Where was I? Because I just went off on a tangent. What was I talking about? Yeah, so they're doing 3% down payments. And you know where the people are getting the 3% down? From a tax credit. There's an $8,000 tax credit. Take that right to the Fannie Mae. So that means it's in effect zero down. Right? Zero down. I mean, we are repeating the same mistakes. Instead of letting housing prices fall. I mean, what is the problem? Home prices are too high. People can't afford these prices. They have to come down. But if they come down, then all the banks fail, because that's the assets on their books. Mortgages, people know, if I have a $500,000 mortgage and my house is $200,000, I ain't paying it. Right? There was I don't know if anybody saw this 60 Minutes interview. They interviewed a couple up in San Francisco who was about to stop making their mortgage payments. And I always said that, you know, this is what's going to happen. It's not just subprime. I mean, people make a rational decision, right? You know, and they said, well, why aren't you're going to walk away from a mortgage? And she said, well, you know, it just doesn't make any sense to spend $3,000 a month on a 1,200 square foot condo, you know. And they said, well, but it made sense when you bought it. She said, oh yeah, well when I bought it, the prices were going up. It made sense because I was going to get rich on the appreciation. Doesn't make sense now that the prices are going down, so I'm just going to walk away. You know, I got no equity, why should I make the payment? I'll just go rent something. So they don't want that to happen. They don't want prices to come down. And in fact, the government has made it easy now for people to walk away from their mortgage. It used to be hard. So this is how these guys work. It used to be that if you walked away from your mortgage, that the amount of money you didn't repay the bank was considered income to you for tax purposes. So you would actually have to pay taxes on it. That was what the rules were up until like a year or two ago. But they have a 5-year moratorium now, something like that, where you can walk away from your mortgage and there are no adverse consequences. So this is the window of opportunity, right, to walk away. And of course, so they have to try to maintain high home prices. So all these subsidies, these tax credits for buying homes, low mortgage rates, it's not about the buyers. None of this helps the buyers. What would help the buyers are lower prices. So the government doesn't want low prices. So this is all about helping the banks, helping the sellers, helping the home builders. None of it helps the buyers. It hurts the buyers. If the government stayed out of the market, the buyers would get great deals. Right? They wouldn't need loan guarantees because houses would be cheap, right? I mean, it's like, you know, the same thing happens, and you know, this will probably come up, you know, in my campaign. But the same thing happens with college tuitions. You know, the government, the politicians, they always want to make believe that they're your best friend, right? And they want to get the votes of the students, so they promise aid for education. The students see high tuition prices and they're worried. I promise more government aid, more guaranteed loans. And the students, great, I'll vote for you because you're going to get me a guaranteed loan so I can go to school. But none of this helps the students. All of it helps the universities and the colleges overcharge the students. Because what happens is now the students get to go to expensive universities and they graduate with enormous debt. Why is that good for kids? Right? If the governments didn't guarantee student loans, students couldn't get loans, which means they couldn't afford to pay the tuitions, which means the colleges wouldn't have any customers. So what would the colleges do? Well, they would either go out of business or cut their prices, like every other business. And you know how much fat there is in a university? how many people they can let, how they can streamline it. I mean, if you can imagine, with all the new technologies and all the computers, you know, I mean, my father went to school, I think, you know, in University of Connecticut in like the 1940s or whatever he went. He didn't have to borrow any money to go. He didn't get any student aid. He didn't get any money from his parents. He just had a summer job as a waiter. And that was enough to pay tuition, room, and board for the whole year, for the whole college tuition. Why can't you do that today? I mean, you know, back then they had no computers, they had no scantrons. I mean, they had to do everything by hand. They had to organize everything by hand. I don't even know if they had photocopy machines back then. You know how expensive that, I mean, it should be so much more efficient to educate kids today. You know, with the internet and all the automation. But no, it's more expensive because of all the subsidies, because of all this. There is no free market. The universities know, well, we'll just raise rates. You know, we'll just raise prices 10% every year because the kids will get the money from the government. Right? Everything the government is involved in, the prices are going up. Wherever the government is not involved, the prices are going down. You know, even if you look in healthcare, you can even look, plastic surgery, cosmetic surgery prices falling. Breast implants are cheaper today than they were 6, 7 years ago. They're cheaper. Because the government, there's no insurance. You can't get insurance money to get a breast implant. So when people want breast implants, they make calls, they shop around, they ask the doctor, they care about what it costs because they have to write the check. Look at eye LASIK surgery. That's another thing that is not covered by insurance. It's a medical procedure. It gets cheaper every year and it gets better every year because the government's got nothing to do with it. But you know, now what do our politicians want to do? They see a problem. Oh, healthcare is expensive. Instead of understanding why it's expensive, well, because of all the government involvement, they say, well, we need more government so people can afford it. And it just makes the situation worse. Now I really went off on a couple of tangents. All right, so mortgage market. So the government is repeating all these mistakes. Instead of allowing the market to correct itself, you got the government basically stepping in and filling the void that the private sector left when they realized what a mistake that they made, right? When all the liquor, when all the booze wore off, and the lenders realized how stupid they were and what dumb things they did, right? And they wanted to, okay, right, we need down payments, we need higher lending standards. The government comes in and says, okay, we'll make those crazy loans. Here, we'll make sure that people can keep on buying houses they can't afford. We'll make sure, all to keep the prices up, to keep the bubble going. But what we have to ask ourselves is, what are the consequences of what the government is doing? You know, when people talk about me and say, okay, Peter Schiff predicted the collapse, predicted the economic collapse, they think the collapse I predicted is over. It hasn't even started yet. Right? The collapse I predicted is coming up. What's happened is the events that I said would trigger that collapse. Right? That's all that's happened. It started, right? The dominoes have begun to fall, but it's a long, long line of them. That's what people don't understand. Because when I wrote Crash Proof, if you remember, what I thought was going to set the real crisis in motion was not the bursting of the housing bubble and the bank failures and all that. It was what the government was going to do about it. That was what got me so worried. It wasn't the disease that I was scared of, but the cure. That's what's going to kill us. Because the stimulus that is required to try to artificially revive this bubble is so big that it will kill the entire economy. We're going to overdose on government stimulus. And the crisis that we are setting up is the collapse of the dollar. That's it. It's a currency crisis. And a lot of people criticize me because the dollar rallied in 2008. And part of my thesis was that when the housing bubble burst and when banks failed and Freddie and Fannie failed, that the government would come to the rescue with stimulus, that the government would not let all this happen and they would start bailing out and they would have to create a lot of money and run these huge deficits. I predicted in Crash Proof that soon the budget deficit would be $1 trillion a year. And I thought that the world would have enough sense to realize that that's really bad for the dollar. And that the minute we tried to do this, the dollar would just go straight down. Instead, it went straight up. All right? And so a lot of people thought, aha, Schiff was wrong. You know, he was wrong. Look, the dollar went up. But look, the dollar went up temporarily. Right? It went up, and now it's collapsing.